I am recording this because they are already lying about what happened. The official account says we encountered an anomaly. It says the fleet suffered a navigational malfunction. It says the breach was accidental, and the response was proportional. Every single word of that is a fabrication, and I will not let it stand. My name is Kale Varaneth. I served as senior archivist of the Thalassa Concord for 31 years. I held the highest clearance available to a civilian scholar, and I watched my government reach into the dark and shake something awake that should have been left alone until the stars burned out. It started with the Veil. Every spacefaring species in the known galaxy knows about the Veil. It is a region of dead space roughly 400 light-years across, surrounded by a shell of gravitational distortion so severe that no ship, no probe, and no signal has ever passed through it and returned. It sits between the Oreth Arm and the Palax Reach, like a wound in the star map, and for as long as any civilization has kept records, it has been marked the same way. A glyph, a warning. The translations vary by species and by era, but the meaning never changes. Do not enter. I had studied those warnings for most of my career. They were curiosities to me, artifacts of civilizations long dead, and civilizations still breathing. The Veilith carved their warning into a moon, 6,000 years ago. The Dreth printed it in every edition of their navigational codex. The Solani, who vanished before our species learned to speak, left a single phrase etched into a derelict station at the edge of the Veil's influence. It translated to something close to, "The sleepers chose their silence." Nobody knew what it meant. Nobody cared enough to find out. The Veil was a hazard. You went around it. You did not ask questions. That was the way of things for millennia, and it should have stayed the way of things forever. But Chancellor Saval was not a patient creature. The Concord was losing. Not a war, not yet, but an economic contest with the Dreth hegemony that had been grinding on for decades. Resource corridors were drying up. Mining colonies were producing less each cycle. The Dreth had expanded into 3 new sectors while our territorial claims stagnated. Saval had built his career on promises of expansion and prosperity, and now both were slipping through his fingers. He needed a win, something massive and undeniable, and he looked at the Veil the way a desperate gambler looks at a locked vault. I was summoned to the Chancellery on a cold morning in the 5th month of that year. The Capitol building sits on an orbital platform above our homeworld, and I remember the way the sunlight cut through the viewport as I waited in the anteroom. I had been told the meeting was about archival policy. It was not about archival policy. There were 11 others in the room when I entered, 6 military officers, 3 resource strategists, and 2 members of the Chancellor's inner circle. Saval himself stood at the head of the table, his pale crest raised in the way our species signals authority. He looked at me and said, "Archivist Varaneth, I need you to compile everything the Concord knows about the Veil. Everything. Every fragment, every warning, every piece of data from every species that has ever referenced it. You have 10 days. I should have asked why. Instead, I said yes. Those 10 days changed the trajectory of my life. I pulled every record, every inscription, every partial translation from the deep archives. Most of it I already knew. The navigational warnings, the cultural taboos, the vague references to something old and powerful that had chosen to withdraw. But as I dug deeper into the oldest fragments, the ones from species that no longer existed, the tone shifted. The Veilith warning was not just a navigational advisory. The full text, which I had never translated in its entirety, read, "We came to the boundary. We heard them breathing on the other side. We left. We recommend you do the same." The Solani fragment was worse. It was not a statement. It was a plea. They are not dead. They are waiting. Do not give them a reason. I compiled my findings into a formal report, 47 pages. I included every translation, every contextual note, every inference I could draw. I flagged the oldest warnings in red and wrote a summary that said, in the clearest language I could manage, that the Veil was not empty, that something was inside it, that every civilization that had encountered it had reached the same conclusion and chosen the same response, which was to stay away. I presented that report to the Chancellery Advisory Committee on the 9th day. 12 people listened. 7 of them were already looking at their data tablets before I finished speaking. Chancellor Saval thanked me for my thoroughness. He called my research comprehensive and valuable. Then he set it aside and moved to the next agenda item, which was the proposed composition of the breach fleet. They had already decided. My report was a formality, a box to check, so they could say an expert had been consulted. I sat in that room and watched them discuss tonnage and fuel reserves and personnel allocation, and I understood that nothing I had found mattered to them. The veil was a prize. The warnings were superstition. 5,000 years of silence was proof enough that whatever had lived inside was long gone. The fleet was assembled in 6 weeks. 13 vessels. The flagship was the Resolve, a deep space cruiser carrying 300 crew and the most advanced sensor array in the Concorde Navy. 12 escort ships surrounded it, bristling with weapons that made me uncomfortable to look at. The mission was classified under the highest tier of military secrecy. The official cover story was a long-range survey of the Palax Reach. Only the crew, the chancellery, and a handful of advisors knew the truth. I was one of those advisors, though by that point, I had no influence over anything. I watched the fleet depart from the observation deck of the Concorde's orbital command station. 13 ships moving in tight formation, their engines burning bright against the dark. Commander Tessick, promoted to admiral for this mission specifically, sent a final transmission to the chancellery, confirming departure and estimated arrival at the Veil's outer boundary. His voice was steady, confident, the voice of a military officer who believed he was leading an expedition into empty space. I stood at that viewport for a long time after the ships disappeared from visual range. The station was quiet around me. A few junior officers moved through the corridor behind me, talking about shift rotations. Somewhere below, the homeworld turned slowly in its orbit, and 2 billion Thalassy went about their lives without knowing that their government had just done something irreversible. I marked the date in my personal log, I noted the time, and I wrote a single line beneath it that I did not show to anyone. Today is the last day the galaxy will be quiet. I did not know how right I was. The first transmissions from the breach fleet arrived 11 days later, and they turned everything I thought I understood about the Veil into a footnote. Admiral Tessick's voice came through the secure channel at the 3rd hour of the morning cycle. I was not on duty. I was asleep in my quarters aboard the command station when my communicator pulled me awake with the priority tone that meant someone very important needed me immediately. I dressed in the dark and made my way to the command center, where I found 6 senior officers already gathered around the primary display. Their faces told me everything, before the audio playback even started. Chancellery Command, this is Admiral Tessick, aboard the Resolve. We have successfully breached the outer boundary of the Veil. I need to report our findings immediately. The interior of this region is not dead space. Repeat, the interior is not dead space. The recording had been playing on loop. I listened to it 3 times, standing behind the communications officer, my hands gripping the back of his chair. Tessick's voice was controlled, professional, but there was something underneath it. Not fear, not yet. Something closer to confusion, the kind of confusion that comes when reality refuses to match the briefing you were given. The follow-up transmissions painted a picture that made my skin crawl. The interior of the Veil was pristine, stars burning in configurations so stable they looked engineered, planets in orbits so precise that the Resolve's navigational computer flagged them as artificial. No debris fields, no asteroid scatter, no signs of entropy or decay. The space inside the Veil looked like someone had cleaned it, maintained it, kept it ready. But there was nothing alive, no electromagnetic signatures, no heat blooms from cities or stations, no communication signals. The ships moved deeper into the Veil for 3 days and found nothing but perfect, silent emptiness. It was, as Tessick described it in one transmission, like walking into a house where every surface has been polished but no one is home. On the 4th day, they found the station. It was in orbit around a gas giant near the center of the Veil, a massive structure made of a metal alloy our sensors could not identify. It was dark, cold. No power readings, no atmospheric signature inside. Tessick sent 2 boarding teams across in armored shuttles, and I listened to the reports from both teams as they moved through the station's interior. The architecture was alien, but not in the way I had expected. Most alien structures have a cultural signature, decorative elements, symbolic design choices, things that tell you about the species that built them. This station had none of that. Every corridor, every chamber, every junction was designed around a single principle: efficiency, speed, the rapid movement of personnel and equipment from one location to another. The boarding teams found no art, no personal quarters, no recreation spaces. The entire structure was built for one purpose, and that purpose was deployment. The linguistics team found the first readable markings on the 7th day. Symbols carved into walls and control surfaces throughout the station, dense and mathematical, a language built on precision rather than expression. They worked around the clock to crack even a basic translation layer, and what they eventually decoded made me forget how to breathe for a moment. It was a log system, thousands of entries, meticulously organized, spanning what appeared to be centuries of activity. The team could only translate fragments, but those fragments were enough. The station was a staging facility, a military coordination hub. The entries referenced fleet movements, supply logistics, weapons testing, and strategic planning on a scale that dwarfed anything the Concorde had ever attempted. And the last entry in the log carried a date. When our translators converted it to standard galactic time, it corresponded to a point almost exactly 5,000 years in the past. The entry was short, 8 words in total, once translated into our language. Consensus achieved. Sleep authorized. Duration indefinite. Wake condition, external breach of veil perimeter. I read that translation on my data tablet in the command center, surrounded by officers who were reading the same words on their own screens. The room was silent. I read it again, then a third time. Each reading made the meaning clearer and the implications worse. Wake condition, external breach. We had not found a tomb. We had not found abandoned ruins. We had found a trap, and we had already sprung it. I tried to contact Chancellor Saval directly. I used every channel available to me, official and unofficial. I was told the Chancellor was in a meeting. I was told the Chancellor was unavailable. I was told the Chancellor would return my message at his earliest convenience. I sent the translation to his office with a single note attached. Recommend immediate withdrawal. The veil is occupied. His office acknowledged receipt. No response followed. The next transmission from the Resolve arrived 6 hours later, and Admiral Tessik's voice had changed. The professional calm was gone. What replaced it was the careful, measured tone of a man who is trying very hard not to panic. Chancellery Command. This is Tessik. We are detecting energy signatures across the veil interior. They started approximately 2 hours ago, and they are accelerating. Multiple planets in the core systems are showing power activation from subsurface installations. We are talking about hundreds of locations activating simultaneously. These are not residual systems coming online. This is coordinated. Something is waking up. The command center erupted. Officers shouting for sensor analysis, communication officers trying to hail the fleet, tactical staff pulling up contingency plans that had never been designed for this scenario. I stood in the middle of it, holding my data tablet with the translation still glowing on its screen, and I felt something I had never felt in 31 years of academic work. I felt like a man standing on a fault line, watching the ground begin to split. Then the signal started. It came from deep inside the veil, from the core systems where the energy signatures were climbing. It broadcast on every frequency simultaneously, every band, every wavelength, every communication channel that the Resolve and its escort ships were monitoring. And it was not random noise. It was not a distress call or an automated beacon. It was a single word, transmitted in every known language in the galactic registry. Thalasi, Dreth, Solani. Languages that had been dead for thousands of years. Languages that no living species spoke. All of them carrying the same word, repeated in a steady, patient rhythm. Acknowledged. 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 The command center went quiet. Every officer stopped moving. Every voice stopped speaking. We listened to that word cycle through language after language, and we understood, all of us, in the same horrible moment, that whatever was inside the veil had heard us come in. It knew we were there, and it was responding. I looked at the officers around me. I saw my own terror reflected in their eyes. And I thought about the Solani fragment, the one I had translated weeks ago, and presented to a room full of people who did not care. They are not dead. They are waiting. Do not give them a reason. We had given them a reason. The signal did not stop. It kept broadcasting through the night cycle. That single word in dozens of languages, steady and patient and absolutely certain. And as I stood in the command center listening to it, I realized that the patience was the worst part. There was no urgency in that signal. No alarm, no rush. Whatever was waking up inside the veil had been asleep for 5,000 years, and it was taking its time. It knew we were not going anywhere. It knew we could not outrun it. And it knew, with a certainty that made my bones ache, that it had all the time in the universe. The signal changed at the 14th hour. It stopped cycling through languages and settled on Thalasi, our language, the language of the species that had breached the veil. And the single word expanded into a sentence that I will carry with me until the day I stop breathing. Identify the governing body responsible for breaching our perimeter. State the population of your species. State whether this action represents a declaration of hostility or a failure of judgment. They were not just awake, they were asking questions. And the way they asked told me something that the Chancellery still did not understand. These were not the questions of a species that had just been startled from sleep. These were the questions of a species following a protocol. A procedure they had written 5,000 years ago for exactly this moment. They had planned for this. They had expected it. And every step of what happened next had already been decided before my species even learned to build a fire. Admiral Tessick responded with standard Concord identification protocols. Name, rank, vessel designation, governing authority. His voice was steady, but I could hear the effort it took to keep it that way. The transmission went out into the veil, and the command center held its breath. The response came in 40 seconds. Not a minute. Not an hour. 40 seconds. Fast enough to tell us they were listening in real time. Fast enough to tell us they were close. Admiral Tessick of the Thalasi Concord vessel resolve. Your identification is received. Clarify the nature of your incursion. Did your governing authority authorize this breach, with knowledge that the veil was occupied? Tessick looked at the recording device in his command deck. I know this because I later watched the visual feed from the Resolve's bridge. He looked at the device as if it could give him an answer, and then he looked at his communications officer, who was receiving a real-time feed from the Chancellery. The Chancellery's response was scripted, carefully worded, and designed to give away nothing. Tessick read it exactly as it was written. The Thalasi Concord launched this expedition under the assessment that the Veil region was unoccupied. Our entry was motivated by scientific and exploratory interest. We intended no hostility toward any existing inhabitants. Silence. Not the silence of a dead channel, but the silence of someone listening, weighing, deciding. It lasted 4 minutes and 20 seconds. I counted every one of them. Then the voice returned, and it had changed again. It was calmer now, almost conversational, as if the interrogation phase was over and something else had begun. We accept your claim of ignorance. We note that warnings were placed at the perimeter of this region in 114 languages, including 3 that are ancestral to your own. We note that these warnings have been in place for approximately 5,000 of your standard years. We note that your species has been spacefaring for approximately 3,000 of those years. We accept, nonetheless, that you may not have understood the nature of these warnings. A pause. Then the voice continued with a shift in register that sent ice through my veins. It was no longer conversational. It was issuing terms. You have 14 standard rotations to withdraw all personnel and vessels from Veil space. Remove all probes, beacons, and monitoring equipment. Transmit no further signals within the Veil boundary after withdrawal. This directive is not a negotiation. It is not a request. Compliance will be recorded. Non-compliance will be interpreted as an act of deliberate hostility and will be answered accordingly. 14 days. They were giving us 14 days to leave. The terms were clear. The consequences were implicit. And any rational government in the history of the galaxy would have taken those terms, ordered the retreat, and spent the next century being grateful that the thing inside the veil had been generous enough to let them walk away. Chancellor Saval was not rational. I was in the command center when his response was broadcast to the fleet and, through the fleet's communications array, into the veil itself. I heard every word. I watched the faces of every officer in the room as they heard it too. And I watched those faces go pale in a way I had never seen before. The Thalassy Concord does not recognize unilateral territorial claims over regions of space that have been unoccupied and unclaimed for 5 millennia. Under the Concord expansion doctrine, the Vale region constitutes sovereign exploratory territory. The Concord fleet will maintain its current position, pending further assessment. We welcome diplomatic dialogue, but will not accept preconditions on our right to operate in unclaimed space. He claimed the Vale. He looked at a civilization that had been sleeping for 5,000 years. A civilization old enough to leave warnings in languages that no longer existed, and he told them their home was his property now. I watched the communications officer's hands tremble as the transmission went out. I watched Admiral Tessik's face on the visual feed from the Resolve. The Admiral closed his eyes for 3 seconds. When he opened them, he looked like a man who had just been told the date of his own death. The voice from the Vale did not respond to the Chancellor's claim. There was no rebuttal, no counter-argument, no outraged declaration, just silence. And then, across every scanner on every ship in the fleet, contacts began to appear. Not 1, not 10, not 100. The Resolve's tactical officer reported the first wave, in a voice that cracked halfway through the sentence. Contact. Multiple contacts. Bearing. All bearings. Range. Close. They are everywhere. Ships were emerging from behind moons, rising from the surfaces of planets, decloaking in the empty space between stars. They materialized out of nothing, as if the darkness itself was unfolding and revealing what it had been hiding. The Resolve's tactical display was designed to track up to 10,000 individual contacts simultaneously. It was the most advanced tracking system in the Concord Navy. It overloaded in less than a minute. The display flickered, stuttered, and then defaulted to a simple text readout that said 2 words: sensor overflow. Admiral Tessik sent an open transmission. I heard it live in the command center. His voice was barely above a whisper. Chancellery Command, I need immediate guidance. I am looking at more warships than exist in the entire Concord Navy. They are not moving. They are holding position around us. Every single one of them is holding position. They are waiting. The Chancellery channel was silent. Chancellor Saval did not respond. His advisors did not respond. The entire civilian government of the Thalassy Concord went quiet at the exact moment when their fleet needed them most. I stood in that command center, and I looked at the tactical display, and I understood something that I had not understood before. We had not found a sleeping civilization. We had not stumbled upon the ruins of some ancient empire that had faded into history. We had found a sleeping military, a war machine so vast that our best sensors could not count its components, and we had just told it, in the most arrogant terms possible, that we were not leaving. The voice from the Vale spoke once more that night. A single sentence, broadcast directly to the Resolve and to every Concord channel simultaneously. It was not angry. It was not threatening. It was the voice of something ancient and powerful that had been woken from a long sleep and was now fully alert and taking stock of the situation with the calm precision of a predator that knows it cannot be challenged. Your 14 rotations have begun. Nobody in the command center spoke for a very long time after that. The days that followed were the strangest of my life. Nothing happened, and that was the most terrifying part. The fleet of ships that had materialized around the Concord expedition did not move. They did not fire, they did not broadcast further communications. They simply existed, thousands upon thousands of vessels arranged in a sphere around the Resolve and its escorts, each one holding perfect station, with no visible propulsion signatures. They were not drifting. They were not orbiting. They were fixed in space as if nailed there, and every attempt by the Resolve sensor team to scan their interiors returned the same result. Classified material, unknown alloy composition, no readable power signatures. They were there, and they were real, and beyond that, our technology could tell us nothing. Admiral Tessik sent hourly reports. His crew was beginning to fracture. Sleep cycles were disrupted. 3 officers requested medical treatment for anxiety so severe they could not perform their duties. The sensor teams worked in shifts, monitoring the surrounding fleet for any change in posture, any hint of movement, any indication of what was coming. There was none. The ships just sat there, waiting. On the 3rd day, The Chancellor finally responded to the fleet. His message was brief and, in retrospect, delusional. He instructed Tessic to maintain position and continue scanning operations. He described the surrounding fleet as a defensive posture consistent with a species that lacks offensive capability. He suggested that the sheer number of ships was a bluff, a display designed to intimidate rather than a genuine military threat. He reminded Tessic that the Concorde had invested significant resources in this expedition and that retreat without tangible results was not acceptable. I read that message in the command center, and I wanted to scream. The Chancellor was sitting in his office above our homeworld, thousands of light years from the Veil, surrounded by advisors who had never seen a combat display in their lives, and he was telling a fleet commander, surrounded by an uncountable armada, that the enemy was bluffing. I filed a formal objection through the Archival Advisory Channel. It was acknowledged and ignored within the hour. On the fifth day, something changed. Not with the fleet surrounding the expedition, but with the Resolve's linguistics team. They had continued working on the station's archives, pulling data from the log systems, and they had made a breakthrough in the translation matrix. They could now read approximately 60% of the archived material, and what they found reshaped everything we thought we knew. The species inside the Veil had a name. They called themselves humans. The word translated directly, without ambiguity, and it appeared in every log entry, every protocol document, every strategic briefing stored in that station's memory. And the archives told their story in fragments that the linguistics team assembled into a picture so disturbing that Tessic classified the findings and restricted them to command staff only. The humans had not always lived inside the Veil. 5,000 years ago, they had been out in the galaxy, not as explorers, not as diplomats, not as traders or scientists or peaceful neighbors. They had been conquerors. The archives referenced campaigns across hundreds of star systems. They referenced species encountered, cataloged, and either absorbed or displaced. They referenced weapons development programs that spanned centuries and produced technologies that the archivists described in terms I could not fully translate, but that carried unmistakable implications of devastation on a stellar scale. And then, 5,000 years ago, they stopped. The archives described a process called the consensus, a species-wide decision, debated and voted upon by every human settlement across their territory, to withdraw from the galaxy entirely. The reasons were documented in language that was clinical and precise. They were tired of war. They were tired of what war required them to become. They recognized that their presence in the galaxy was a destabilizing force, that their capacity for organized destruction exceeded their capacity for restraint, and that the only responsible course of action was to remove themselves from the equation. They built the Veil. They engineered the gravitational shell that made the region impenetrable. They moved their entire civilization inside it. Every colony, every station, every ship, and they sealed the door behind them. Then they went to sleep. Not death. Not stasis in the way we understood it. A deliberate, maintained suspension of their civilization, kept alive by automated systems that monitored the Veil's integrity and maintained the infrastructure within. And they left the warnings. 114 languages. Every species they had encountered during their time in the galaxy received a message carved in their own tongue. Do not enter. Do not disturb us. Do not make us wake up. I read the linguistics team's report in my quarters that night. I read it twice. Then I sat in the dark for an hour, thinking about Chancellor Saval and his expansion doctrine, and his belief that the surrounding fleet was a bluff. These were not the ships of a species that bluffed. These were the ships of a species that had conquered a significant portion of the galaxy, grown horrified by their own success, and locked themselves away to prevent further damage. They were not pretending to be dangerous. They were dangerous on a scale that our civilization could not comprehend, and they had given us 14 days to leave before they demonstrated exactly how dangerous they were. On the 7th day, a ship detached from the surrounding fleet. It was small, unarmed, according to the Resolve scans. It approached the Concorde formation slowly, broadcasting a simple message. Requesting permission to dock with your flagship. One representative, no weapons, purpose, communication. Admiral Tessic granted permission against the Chancellery's explicit orders. I later learned that he told his executive officer, If they wanted to destroy us, they would not be asking to talk first. A single human boarded the Resolve. I was not there. I was thousands of light years away, watching through the visual feed that Tessic had routed to the command center against classification protocols. But I saw the recording, and I will describe what I saw as accurately as I can. The human was smaller than I expected, shorter than the average Thalassa, by nearly a full head, with a body that looked soft and unprotected. No natural armor, no visible claws or defensive structures. Pale skin over a frame that seemed almost fragile. The human wore a simple gray uniform, with no rank insignia, no decorations, no visible technology of any kind. He walked through the Resolve's corridors with an escort of 4 armed Thalassa Marines, and he did not look at any of them. He walked like a person who had been in many places like this before, and found nothing remarkable about the experience. His name, he told Admiral Tessic when they met in the Resolve's command briefing room, was Nathan Cole. He spoke fluent Thalassa, not the clumsy translated approximation the automated signal had used. Fluent, colloquial. He used idioms that most non-native speakers would not know. When Tessic asked how he had learned the language so quickly, Cole smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes and said, "We have been listening to your communications since you breached the perimeter. Your language is elegant. I enjoyed learning it." 7 days. He had learned a language with 47 tonal registers and 12 grammatical cases in 7 days. The linguistics team later confirmed that this was consistent with the cognitive capabilities described in the archives. The humans were not just militarily superior, they were intellectually superior in ways that made comparison meaningless. Cole sat across from Admiral Tessic and spoke for 30 minutes. He did not make threats. He did not issue demands. He explained. He told Tessic what the veil was and why it existed. He told him about the consensus, about the decision to sleep, about the warnings placed at the perimeter. He told him that the humans had not wanted to wake up, that the sleep was supposed to be permanent, that the entire point of the veil was to remove humanity from a galaxy they had been harming. "You were supposed to leave us alone," Cole said. His voice was quiet, not angry, something worse than angry, tired. The warnings were in every language we could find. We spent decades placing them. We made them as clear as we possibly could. All you had to do was stay away. Tessic, to his credit, did not attempt to justify the breach. He simply asked, "What happens now?" Cole looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "That depends on your Chancellor. You have 7 days remaining. If your ships leave, we return to sleep. The veil closes. Your species is noted in our records as having made an error of judgment, and we move on. If your ships remain..." He paused. "We would prefer that your ships leave." Tessic transmitted the full recording to the Chancellery within the hour. I watched Chancellor Saval review it in a session that I was technically not authorized to observe, but that no one bothered to exclude me from. The Chancellor watched the recording twice. He paused it on a frame showing Nathan Cole's face, that quiet, tired expression that carried no malice and no mercy, and he said something that I will never forget. "He is afraid of us. That is why they are talking instead of shooting. They know they are outmatched." I stared at the Chancellor. I stared at a man who had looked at a species that had voluntarily removed itself from the galaxy because it was too good at destruction and had concluded that they were the ones who were afraid. I opened my mouth to speak. The officer beside me put a hand on my arm and shook his head. I closed my mouth. I had already been ignored once. I would be ignored again. Saval ordered the fleet to power weapons and advance to what he called a posture of confident readiness. He wanted the human fleet to see the Concord ships with their weapons hot, moving forward instead of retreating. He believed this would call their bluff. He believed this because he was a politician who had never stood on the deck of a warship and who understood military power the way a child understands fire, as a thing that exists to serve his will. The order reached Admiral Tessic at the 11th hour of the 8th day. Tessic protested. His protest was overruled. He followed the order. The Resolve and its 12 escorts powered their weapons systems, oriented their formations forward, and advanced 300 kilometers deeper into the veil. The human fleet responded. Not with weapons fire, with something worse. Something designed not to harm but to educate. A single ship from the human formation, a vessel roughly the size of the Resolve, broke from its position and oriented itself toward an uninhabited moon, approximately 80,000 kilometers from the Concorde fleet's position. The moon was a barren rock, no atmosphere, no resources, no strategic value. It was a ball of stone and metal, with a mass of 7.2 times 10 to the 22nd power in kilograms. Unremarkable in every way. The human ship fired once. I watched the sensor data from the command center. Every officer in the room watched. Every instrument recorded. The moon did not explode. Explosions leave debris, leave heat signatures, leave gravitational echoes. The moon ceased to exist. It was there, and then it was not. The mass was gone. The gravitational signature was gone. The space where the moon had been was empty, as if it had never contained anything at all. The Resolve sensors recorded a transit time of 0.003 seconds from the moment of firing to the moment of complete erasure. Every physicist in the Concorde would later describe this as physically impossible. But the sensors did not lie. The data was clean. The moon was gone, and nothing had taken its place. Nathan Cole was still aboard the Resolve when it happened. He was standing in the briefing room with Admiral Tessick when the ship shuddered from the gravitational disruption of a celestial body vanishing from local space. He did not flinch. He did not look surprised. He looked at Tessick with that same quiet, tired expression and said, "That weapon is 5,000 years old. We built it before we went to sleep. We have been dreaming of better things since then. 5,000 years old. The weapon that had just erased a moon from existence was an antique, a relic. Something they had built, and then improved upon, during 5 millennia of suspended consciousness, dreaming of more efficient ways to unmake the universe. And they were telling us this, not as a boast, but as a warning. They were saying, as clearly as language allowed, you have seen what our past can do. Do not make us show you what our present is capable of." Admiral Tessick cut the Chancellery channel. He severed the connection to Chancellor Saval, to the Advisory Committee, to every civilian authority in the Concorde government. He assumed direct command of the fleet under military emergency protocols, and he ordered an immediate full withdrawal. Every ship, every probe, every beacon, everything out, now. The Concorde fleet turned and ran. There is no other word for it. They powered their drives to maximum, and they fled toward the Veil's outer boundary, as fast as their engines could carry them. Nobody spoke on the bridge of the Resolve. Nobody spoke on any of the escort ships. The only sound on any Concorde channel was the hum of engines at full thrust, and the quiet breathing of crews who had just watched a moon disappear. I watched them go on the long-range display. 13 ships, moving in formation, retreating from something they should never have approached. And as I watched, I noticed something on the tactical overlay that the officers around me had not yet registered. The human fleet was moving, not chasing the Concorde ships, not pursuing them toward the boundary, moving outward, expanding, spreading through the veil and toward its edges in every direction, like a sleeping body stretching after a long rest. They were not just waking up to deal with us. They were waking up entirely, fully, permanently. The breach had triggered something that went beyond a defensive response. The consensus, the agreement to sleep, had included a clause. If the perimeter was breached, the sleep would end. Not temporarily, not for the duration of the threat. The sleep would end, and the humans would rejoin the galaxy. I watched the tactical display, and I saw thousands of ships fanning out toward the Veil's boundaries, and I understood with a clarity that felt like a physical blow to the chest. We had not just woken them up. We had reminded them that the galaxy was still here. The Concorde fleet cleared the Veil boundary in 4 days. They emerged into normal space and transmitted their full sensor logs to the command center, and those logs were immediately classified at a level that technically meant I should never have seen them. I saw them anyway. Everyone in the command center saw them. The classification was a reflex, a bureaucratic spasm from a government that was already in freefall. Chancellor Saval was removed from office on the 2nd day after the fleet's return. Not voluntarily. The military leadership, backed by 3 of the 5 provincial governors, invoked an emergency authority statute that had not been used in 400 years. Saval was escorted from the chancellery under armed guard, protesting every step. He was still insisting, even as they took him away, that the humans were bluffing, that the moon's destruction was a trick, that the Concorde should send a larger fleet. The guards did not listen to him. Nobody listened to him anymore. The blame shifted quickly after that. The military blamed the civilian government for authorizing the breach. The civilian government blamed the military for failing to provide accurate threat assessments. Both of them, in a move that I found personally devastating, blamed the archival department for not making the warnings clear enough. I was called before an inquiry board and asked why my report had not been more emphatic. I told them that I had flagged the warnings in red. I told them that I had written in the clearest possible language that the veil was occupied. I told them that the Chancellor had set my report aside without reading the summary. They noted my testimony and moved on to the next witness. I absorbed the accusation. I did not fight it, partly because I was too tired, and partly because I knew that the blame game was irrelevant. It did not matter who was at fault. What mattered was what happened next, and what happened next was something that none of us could control. The humans sent their message on the 14th day after the fleet's withdrawal. It was not sent to the Concorde. It was sent to everyone. Every known species in the Galactic Registry received the transmission simultaneously, broadcast on every frequency, in every language, with a precision that demonstrated a comprehensive knowledge of galactic communications infrastructure that should have been impossible for a species that had been asleep for 5 millennia. They knew our channels. They knew our encryption protocols. They knew our languages. They had been listening to the entire galaxy while they slept, absorbing information, updating their knowledge, maintaining awareness even in their suspended state. The message was calm, measured, almost gentle, and it was the most frightening thing I had ever read. To the civilizations of the known galaxy, this message is transmitted by the human collective, originators and inhabitants of the region you know as the Veil. We address you with no hostile intent. We wish to explain our history, our absence, and our return. Approximately 5,000 standard years ago, our civilization made a collective decision to withdraw from galactic affairs. This decision was motivated by our recognition that our continued presence among you was a source of instability and suffering. We are, by our nature, a species oriented toward conflict. We excel at it. We find satisfaction in it, and the consequences of that excellence, for ourselves and for the civilizations we encountered, became intolerable to us. We chose to sleep. We chose to remove ourselves. We left warnings at our borders and asked only to be left in peace. Those warnings were recently breached by a vessel belonging to the Thalassy Concorde. We do not hold the Thalassy species collectively responsible for this breach. We recognize it as the decision of a small number of individuals acting without full understanding of its implications. However, the breach has triggered protocols that cannot be reversed. Our sleep has ended. We are awake, and we will not return to suspension. We do not intend to resume the patterns of our past. We do not seek territory. We do not seek conflict. We do not seek dominion over any species or any region of space. But we are here, and we will remain here, and the galaxy must accommodate our presence as we must accommodate yours. We ask for patience. We ask for caution. And we ask that you extend to us the same restraint we intend to extend to you. End of message. I read it in the command center, surrounded by officers who read it in silence. I read it 3 times. It was polite. It was reasonable. It was the most diplomatic communication I had ever encountered, and every word of it radiated a power so absolute that politeness was the only option left to beings who could erase moons without effort and had spent 5,000 years dreaming of more efficient methods. The galaxy's response was not unified. It was never going to be unified. The Dreth hegemony, ever opportunistic, immediately dispatched a diplomatic envoy to the Veil's boundary, seeking to establish relations with the humans before anyone else could. Their calculation was transparent. Ally with the most powerful force in the galaxy, and use that alliance against the Concorde. The humans received the Dreth envoy politely, and declined their proposal. They declined every proposal. They were not interested in alliances. They were not interested in trade agreements or mutual defense pacts or any of the mechanisms that galactic civilizations use to organize their relationships. They simply existed, and they watched, and they waited. The older species reacted differently. The Valith, whose warning I had translated in my report, went silent. Their entire diplomatic apparatus shut down overnight. Their border stations closed. Their trade routes rerouted. They remembered, even if only through ancient records and cultural memory, what the humans had been before the veil. And their response was the response of a species that had survived the first time and was not confident of surviving a second. 3 other species, all of them old enough to have first-hand historical records of the human era, began evacuating their border systems. Not quickly, not in panic, slowly and methodically, the way you pack your belongings when you know a storm is coming, but you are not sure when it will arrive. Nobody questioned these evacuations. Nobody called them excessive. The species that remembered the humans were the ones most afraid of them, and nobody in the galaxy was foolish enough to suggest that their fear was unfounded. I requested a meeting with Nathan Cole before he departed Concord Space. I did not expect it to be granted. I was a civilian archivist, a mid-level academic with no political authority and no diplomatic standing. But the request was passed along through channels I did not understand, and 3 days later, I received a message confirming that Cole would meet me aboard the Resolve, which was still docked at the command station, undergoing post-mission debriefing. I met him in the same briefing room where he had spoken with Admiral Tessick. He was standing by the viewport when I entered, looking out at the stars. He turned when I came in, and he smiled, and the smile was the most human thing about him. It was warm and tired, and a little sad. We spoke for nearly an hour. He asked about my work, about the warnings, about the translations I had compiled. He seemed genuinely interested, and genuinely regretful that the warnings had not been enough. I told him about the Solani fragment, the one that read, "They are not dead, they are waiting." He nodded slowly when I recited it and said, "The Solani were wise, we liked them. We were sorry when they faded." I asked him the question that had been consuming me since the moment I first read the translation from the station's archives, the question that sat at the center of everything and that no one else seemed to be asking. Why did you build a wake condition at all? If you wanted to sleep forever, why include a trigger? Why not seal the veil completely, make it impossible to breach, and ensure that nothing could ever disturb you? He looked at me for a long time. His eyes were dark and steady, and there was something behind them that I could not name, something that looked like the weight of 5,000 years of dreaming about who you used to be. Because we did not trust ourselves to mean it, he said. The consensus was not unanimous. It was close, 97%, but 3% of us argued that we should stay, that we had a responsibility to the galaxy, that removing ourselves was cowardice. And even among the 97% who voted for sleep, there was a current of doubt. We built the wake condition because part of us believed that if someone came knocking, if someone breached the veil despite every warning we left, it meant the galaxy still had not learned to solve its problems without us. It meant the galaxy still needed what we were, even if what we were was terrifying. And that meant we still had work to do. He paused. Then he said, "We were afraid of ourselves. That is why we slept, and we are still afraid." But fear is not a reason to hide when someone comes to your door and tells you they need help, even if they do not know they are asking. I did not have a response to that. I sat in silence for a while, and so did he, and the stars turned slowly beyond the viewport. I am recording this final entry from my quarters aboard the command station. It has been 4 months since the veil was breached. Chancellor Saval is awaiting trial for abuse of authority. Admiral Tessick has been promoted to fleet commander and is overseeing the reconstruction of the Concord's military doctrine, which now begins with a single directive, printed at the top of every briefing document. Do not engage human vessels under any circumstances. Human ships have been observed in 12 different sectors since the veil opened. They have not fired a weapon. They have not claimed territory. They have not issued demands or established borders, or done any of the things that a conquering species does when it returns to the stage. They have simply arrived, quiet and watchful, in places where conflicts are brewing or tensions are rising. They observe. They record. Occasionally, when 2 species are on the brink of something destructive, a human ship will position itself between them, and both sides will stop and reconsider, because both sides understand what that ship represents. They are trying to be gentle. I believe that. I believe Nathan Cole when he said they do not intend to resume the patterns of their past. I believe the consensus was sincere, and I believe the humans genuinely wish to coexist without domination. But I also believe what the archives showed me, the records of a species so gifted at war that they frightened themselves into hiding. The gentleness is real. The restraint is real, but underneath it, unchanged and undimmed by 5,000 years of sleep, is the capacity that made them build the veil in the first place. They are awake now, they are among us, and every species in the galaxy is holding its breath, because we all understand the same truth. The humans did not sleep because they were weak. They did not hide because they were afraid of us. They slept because they were afraid of themselves, because they knew what they would do if they stayed awake, and they could not bear the weight of it. Now they are awake, and they are carrying that weight again, carefully, deliberately, with a discipline that borders on the sacred. They are trying so hard to be something other than what they are, and every day I watch the sensor feeds and I see their ships, patient and silent among the stars, and I think about Nathan Cole standing at that viewport, tired and sad, and carrying the burden of a species that conquered half a galaxy and then chose to stop. I pray for all our sakes that we let them be gentle. I pray that no one tests them. I pray that no government, no chancellor, no ambitious fool looks at the quiet ships and the careful diplomacy and mistakes restraint for weakness. Because the humans are not weak. They are the strongest thing this galaxy has ever produced. And they are choosing, every single day, not to prove it. I end this recording with a note to whoever finds it, whenever they find it, however many years from now. Remember the veil, remember the warnings. Remember that they told us what they were, and we did not listen. And if you are reading this in a galaxy that is still at peace, then know that the peace exists, because the humans are allowing it, not because they cannot destroy it, because they have decided, for now, not to. That decision is the most fragile and precious thing in the universe. Do not take it for granted. Do not test it, and whatever you do, do not wake them again. They are already awake, and they are watching. This is Cale Varaneth, Senior Archivist of the Thalassy Concord, signing off. May the stars keep their silence, and may we all have the wisdom to do the same.